Let the world around you fade away. Take a moment to settle into your bed, feeling the soft embrace of your sheets, the quiet rhythm of your breath. You've arrived at a place where time slows, where the mind can wander far from the worries of the day. In this space, you are safe, at peace, and free to let go. As we begin this journey tonight, let the story guide you gently into a restful slumber. Close your eyes if you wish, and allow the soft voice of this narrative to carry you back through time, far beyond the reach of modern life. Tonight, we will learn about the ancient Vikings and the food that sustained them. But this will not be a hurried journey, filled with sharp facts or jarring details. No, this story is meant to soothe you, to settle into your mind like the soft crackling of a distant fire. Allow the quiet rhythm of words to guide you, gently, toward rest. The Vikings were a people of the land and sea, their lives shaped by the natural world in ways that many of us can only imagine. What did they eat? What fueled their long journeys across stormy seas and their battles on distant shores? What nourished their strength in the face of relentless winters and endless nights? But as we travel back in time, there is no rush. Just a steady unfolding, a calm narrative that carries you deeper into relaxation. The foods the Vikings ate were more than sustenance. They were part of the pulse of life. So, let us journey slowly into their world, where each meal was a simple but essential ritual. Now, as you settle in, take another slow, deep breath. Feel your body soften and relax. The world outside is dimming, and soon we'll find ourselves in a Viking longhouse, the warm glow of the hearth flickering in the air, the scent of fresh bread and roasting meats gently mingling with the cool, clean air of the outdoors. There is no hurry here, just a peaceful, steady unfolding of time and a deep sense of peace awaiting you. Imagine a village in the distance, nestled near the edge of the forest. The longhouses stand tall against the rising sun, their roofs lined with thatch, covered in moss and the natural wear of seasons past. The air is fresh with the scent of pine and earth. The ground beneath your feet feels cool but firm, dampened by the morning dew. You can hear the soft rustling of the leaves in the trees, the slow whisper of the wind moving across the hills. The Viking longhouse, where the heart of daily life beats, stands before us. It is built of wood, with walls that tell stories of generations. Inside, the warmth from the hearth fills the room with a gentle glow. The flickering fire dances, casting long shadows that sway on the rough-hewn walls. The scent of burning wood, mingled with the aroma of fresh-baked bread, makes the air feel rich, alive with the promise of a new day. The space within the longhouse is simple. Wooden beams stretch above, a canopy that holds the weight of the roof. The fire, located at the center of the room, keeps everyone warm, and its steady flicker creates a sense of peace. Around the fire, the floor is lined with straw mats, offering a soft place to sit or lie down. Blankets of thick wool are spread across wooden platforms where families sleep. The simple luxury of warmth and comfort is found here. The people within the longhouse move quietly, their movements slow and deliberate, following the rhythms of nature. The Vikings were a people connected to their surroundings in a way that seems distant in our modern world. They lived in close harmony with nature, moving through the cycles of the seasons and their own routines with ease. From morning to night, their lives unfolded in a gentle rhythm, as predictable as the rising and setting of the sun. The day began with the crowing of the rooster, signaling the start of the day. The first task was always the fire, ensuring that the hearth was ready to cook the first meal of the day. At this time, the scent of porridge, oats, and barley filled the room. Simple foods those, harvested and cultivated by their hands, provided the sustenance they needed. Breakfast often consisted of porridge, made with oats or barley, simmered slowly over the fire until it reached a creamy consistency. It was thick, nourishing, and warm, just like the hearth that heated the longhouse. Sometimes dried meat or fish would be added, providing protein for the long day ahead. The Vikings' connection to the land meant that every meal was a reflection of the bounty nature provided. They hunted, fished, and gathered, but nothing was ever wasted. Preservation was an art they perfected. The Vikings would harvest grains, like barley and rye, and grind them into flour. They would also gather berries, nuts, and herbs from the forests surrounding their homes. In the summer, the long hours of daylight allowed them to work tirelessly in the fields, tending their crops or foraging for wild foods. The evenings, though, would be quieter, a time for reflection, for eating together, and for telling stories by the fire dot. As the days stretched long and the nights grew colder, the food that had been prepared and preserved throughout the warmer months became more valuable. The winter months, often filled with snow and biting winds, meant that fresh food was a rarity. The Vikings depended on their stores of dried fish, salted meats, pickled vegetables, and grains that had been carefully preserved. Winter meals were heartier, often focused around the foods they could keep for long periods: stews, soups, and breads made from stored grains, simmering for hours over the fire. The quiet sound of the pot bubbling, mixed with the occasional crackle of the fire, would accompany the dark evenings. The Vikings would sit down together, breaking bread and enjoying the simple yet sustaining meals that had been prepared over the course of the year. During the evenings, the longhouse had become a gathering space. Families would sit together, warming themselves by the fire, sipping mead or ale from wooden mugs. The air would be thick with the warmth of the hearth and the low, comforting hum of conversation. Sometimes a bard or elder would share a tale of the gods or of the great warriors who had gone before them. The meal was always a communal event, a time to bond, share stories, and replenish the energy needed for the days ahead. This peaceful cycle of life, the rhythm of the seasons, the turning of time marked by the rising and setting of the sun, formed the foundation of the Viking experience. Food, the source of energy, was always at the center of their lives, not only sustaining their bodies, but connecting them to each other and to the land. It was a quiet harmony, as natural as the ebb and flow of the tides. And so, as the day would fade into night, the flicker of the fire would become the guiding light, wrapping the family in warmth, comfort, and the simplicity of the life they led. There was no rush, no urgency, only the steady beat of time passing gently forward, as it always had. Their lives unfolded at their own pace, governed by the seasons, the land, and the simple truth that food, like all good things, takes time. As we reflect on their lives, we can see that the Vikings, though fierce warriors, found peace and sustenance in the slow rhythms of their daily lives. There was no rush to their meals, no hurry to their work. Their food was as much about survival as it was about connection, a reminder that nourishment comes not only from what we eat, but from the way we live, the people we share our lives with, and the way we honor the earth that sustains us. As the shadows lengthen and the firelight flickers in the corner of the longhouse, let us drift quietly into the very essence of the Viking diet. Their food was the cornerstone of their survival, the sustenance that powered their great feats of strength, endurance, and resilience. It was not just a matter of survival. The Viking diet was closely tied to their way of life, their culture, and their relationship with the land and sea. The Vikings were people who lived in close harmony with nature. Their diet was shaped by the environment they inhabited, the frigid northern lands, the cold seas, and the forests rich with wildlife. Each meal was a reflection of the world around them, a world where food was not taken for granted, but was earned, harvested, or hunted. Every bite of food was a reminder of their connection to the land, their ancestors, and the rhythms of nature that guided their lives. In the early morning hours, before the light of the sun crept over the horizon, the Vikings would rise. Days were filled with physical labor cutting wood, building ships, and tending to their livestock. But before the day's work began, the hearth would flicker to life, and the first meal of the day would be prepared. It was a quiet, humble affair, a porridge made from oats, barley, or rye, mixed with water or milk. Sometimes honey would be stirred in, sweetening the simple dish. These grains were a staple of their diet, filling, nourishing, and rich in energy. The Vikings would consume this breakfast to fuel their long hours of labor ahead, knowing that the foundation of strength was in what they consumed in the morning. But the Viking diet was much more than just grains. The Vikings were hunters and gatherers, and their food came from the land and the sea. They relied heavily on what nature provided, but their resourcefulness allowed them to turn even the harshest environments into something that could sustain them. In the vast forests, they hunted wild animals, deer, wild boar, and small game. They used every part of the animal, from the meat to the fur, making sure nothing went to waste. These meats, rich in protein, were a vital part of their diet, providing the strength needed for their rigorous daily activities and their legendary voyages. Along the coasts and in the rivers, the Vikings were skilled fishermen. They fished for herring, cod, and salmon, and their seafood was prized not only for its taste, but for its richness in omega-3 fatty acids, which helped to maintain their energy and physical endurance. The Vikings would dry and preserve the fish to ensure a steady supply during the long, harsh winters when fresh food was scarce. The salted fish would be soaked, cooked, and eaten, providing much-needed protein to sustain them. But it was not only meat and fish that the Vikings relied on. They also turned to the earth for nourishment. Their fields were filled with oats, barley, and rye grains that formed the basis of their bread and porridge. These grains were harvested in the warmer months and stored carefully, ready to provide sustenance when the bitter cold of winter arrived. The Vikings were masters of preservation, drying and storing their grains, as well as vegetables like cabbage, onions, and carrots, to ensure they had food throughout the year. Herbs and wild plants were an essential part of their diet. The Vikings, with their deep knowledge of the land, foraged for wild greens, berries, and herbs, which were used to flavor their meals and at times serve medicinal purposes. Wild garlic, thyme, juniper berries, and other native herbs were carefully collected and added to dishes. These herbs not only added flavor, but also had natural healing properties that helped with digestion, strengthening the immune system, and even easing sore muscles after a long day's work. The Vikings were also known for their love of dairy. They kept cows, goats, and sheep, and milk was a primary source of nutrition. But it was the products made from milk, cheese, butter, and yogurt that truly stood out. The Vikings would churn butter from cream and use it to cook their food or spread on their bread. Cheese, made from goats or cow's milk, was a common food item. It was rich in protein and fats, helping to sustain their energy throughout the day. And yogurt, fermented with natural bacteria, had both health benefits and kept well throughout the year, making it a perfect addition to their diet during the long winter months. Let us now turn to the grains that the Vikings worked so tirelessly to cultivate. Barley, oats, and rye were the lifeblood of their diet. These grains, ground into flour, were used to make breads, cakes, and porridges. The breads they baked were often dense, filled with grains and sometimes seeds, providing lasting energy to keep them going during their long days. These hearty breads were often dipped in soups or stews, which were made from the meats they had hunted and the vegetables they had gathered. In the winter, the Vikings relied on their stored food. The preservation of meat through salting, drying, and smoking allowed them to survive in the harsh conditions of winter when fresh food was scarce. Dried fish, salted meats, and root vegetables would form the base of their winter meals, giving them the nutrition needed to endure until the next harvest. These preserved foods were simple, but they were vital for survival. As the days shortened and the cold winds of winter settled in, the Vikings would gather around the hearth for their evening meal. The fire crackled, casting soft light over the room, and the scent of stews and roasted meats filled the air. The Viking table, simple as it was a place of warmth and connection. Families would gather to share the fruits of their labor, reflecting on the day's work and looking ahead to the challenges of the future. It was a time for community, for storytelling, and for the sharing of food that sustained them through the changing seasons. The Viking diet was built on practicality. The food they consumed was designed to fuel them for the physical work they did each day, and to ensure they had the energy to embark on long voyages. Their diet was rich in protein, fiber, and healthy fats, all sourced from the natural world. And in the quiet of the longhouse, as they shared their meals, the Vikings knew that the food they ate was essential to their survival. It was as much a part of their way of life as the ships they built and the lands they traveled. In many ways, their diet was a reflection of their relationship with the earth and the sea. It was simple but rich, grounded in the land they lived on and the waters they sailed. The Vikings were a people who understood the importance of food, not only for survival, but for the strength, unity, and endurance needed to thrive in their rugged world. As we reflect on the Viking diet, we see how closely it was tied to their environment. Each meal is a reminder of their deep connection to nature, the harvest, the hunt, the catch from the sea. Their food, prepared and consumed in the stillness of the longhouse, was more than just sustenance. It was a quiet tribute to the natural world that shaped their lives, and it nourished them for the challenges ahead. And so, as we move forward in our journey, we can feel the steady rhythms of Viking life, a gentle ebb and flow of seasons, the slow, deliberate work of gathering, growing, and preparing food. It was a life rooted in the earth, a life sustained by simple, nourishing meals. The Viking diet was, in its own way, a reflection of their strength, resilience, and respect for the world around them. Now, let us quietly turn our attention to the food that powered the Viking warriors. Picture them in your mind, strong and resilient, their bodies hardened by the harsh climates and relentless challenges they faced. These warriors, who sailed across oceans and engaged in battles that shaped the course of history, needed sustenance that not only filled their stomachs, but also sustained their strength and endurance. Their meals, crafted from the natural bounty around them, were not simply about survival. They were designed to fuel their bodies for the demanding tasks at hand. As the fire gently flickers in the hearth, casting warm shadows upon the walls of their longhouse, imagine the Viking warriors preparing for their day. The first light of dawn slowly creeps through the small window openings of the longhouse. It is in these moments, before the battles and voyages, that their meals were vital to their strength. The food they consumed was directly tied to their energy levels, physical prowess, and overall health. The Viking diet was rich in protein, and meat was one of the primary sources of this essential macronutrient. The Vikings consumed a wide variety of meats, including beef, lamb, goat, and even wild game such as venison. These meats were not simply eaten for pleasure. They were integral to the daily routines of the Viking people, particularly for the warriors who needed to maintain their strength and endurance. The meat was often slow-cooked over an open flame, allowing it to absorb the smoky, rich flavors that would sustain them during the long hours of physical activity that lay ahead. The smell of roasting meat, mingling with the earthy scent of the fire, filled the longhouse, offering comfort and warmth in the cool, crisp air. For the Viking warrior, protein-rich foods like these were essential for building muscle, repairing tissue, and providing the energy necessary for long days of combat or labor. But the Vikings didn't solely rely on land-based animals for their protein intake. Fish was also a key component of their diet, particularly for those living along the coasts or near lakes and rivers. Fish like herring, salmon, and cod were commonly caught, and these fish were often preserved through methods like drying, salting, or smoking. This preservation allowed the Vikings to have access to nutrient-rich fish throughout the year, especially during the long, harsh winters when fresh food was scarce. Dried fish was a common staple in the Viking warriors' diet, providing a high source of protein and essential fatty acids. These preserved fish were often boiled, stewed, or added to broths, making them an integral part of their daily meals. The Vikings' reliance on fish was not just limited to their coastal regions. They had extensive knowledge of fishing techniques, and fishing was an essential skill for the entire Viking community. The sound of the oars dipping into the water, the rhythmic motion of the Viking longships as they glided across the seas, was not just a method of travel, it was a way of life. Fishing expeditions were often part of the Vikings' daily routine, and the catch was shared among the community, ensuring that everyone had enough sustenance. For the warriors, fish was not only a source of food, but it provided the necessary protein to maintain their strength and stamina during the challenges of warfare. In addition to meat and fish, eggs were also an important source of protein in the Viking diet. Domesticated birds, such as chickens and ducks, provided eggs, which were often eaten in various forms, such as boiled, scrambled, or mixed into other dishes. Eggs are a complete source of protein, providing all the essential amino acids necessary for muscle building and repair. For a Viking warrior, the inclusion of eggs in their diet was a practical way to ensure that they received the nutrients required for the physical demands of their daily life. Eggs, though simple, were highly nutritious and were often used to supplement meals, providing a quick and efficient source of energy. The Vikings did not solely rely on animal-based sources for their food. They also consumed significant amounts of carbohydrates to fuel their bodies. Carbohydrates, especially those derived from grains, were essential for providing sustained energy. Barley, oats, and rye were common grains grown by the Vikings. These grains were versatile and could be used in a variety of ways. Oatmeal and porridge were staples in their diet, often eaten in the morning to start the day. These carbohydrate-rich meals provided slow-release energy that was essential for enduring long voyages, intense physical labor, or long hours of battle. The grains were often ground into flour and used to bake bread or make flatbreads, which were a common part of their daily meals. The Vikings' reliance on grains and carbohydrates was not just about meeting their energy needs. It was also about their ability to store and preserve food. Grains could be harvested, stored, and used throughout the year, providing a reliable food source during the long winters. The Vikings had a deep understanding of how to manage their food resources, ensuring that they had enough to sustain them during the harshest months. The smell of freshly baked bread, the warmth of the flatbreads toasted over the fire, became an integral part of their meals, comforting them after a long day of physical exertion. But the Viking diet was not just about survival, it was also about fueling their warriors for their most challenging tasks. The warriors needed stamina and strength to endure their grueling training, battle tactics, and long voyages across the seas. The food they consumed had to provide the energy necessary to support their active lifestyles. The Vikings were known for their fierce physical prowess, and their diet played a crucial role in maintaining their ability to fight and travel long distances. It was not uncommon for Viking warriors to consume larger portions of protein and carbohydrates before embarking on a journey or before battle, ensuring they had the energy and strength to face the challenges ahead that Viking warriors also consumed. Herbs and natural remedies to maintain their health. Juniper berries, thyme, garlic, and other herbs were often used to season their food, but they also had medicinal properties. Juniper berries, for example, were believed to aid in digestion and were often used in stews or broths. Garlic, known for its antibacterial properties, was commonly used to ward off illness and promote overall health. The Vikings had a deep understanding of the natural remedies around them, using herbs and plants not only for flavor, but also for their health benefits. These natural remedies played an important role in keeping the warriors in peak physical condition, ensuring that they could continue to fight and survive during their long campaigns. Another key component of the Viking warriors' diet was dairy. The Vikings were known for their cattle, goats, and sheep, and dairy products were an essential part of their diet. Milk, cheese, and butter were consumed regularly, providing the necessary fats and proteins to maintain energy levels. Dairy products also provided a source of calcium, important for bone health, which was crucial for the Vikings, who endured rigorous physical activity. Cheese, often made from goat or cow's milk, was a rich source of protein and fat, and it could be easily stored and preserved for long periods, making it a reliable food source during the winter months. As we sit here, by the warmth of the flickering fire, we can almost imagine the simple yet nourishing meals that powered the Viking warriors. Their food, carefully selected to provide the necessary nutrients for their bodies, allowed them to endure the harsh conditions they faced. Through their diet, the Vikings were able to face the challenges of their world, from the long winters in Scandinavia to the demanding voyages across the seas. Their meals were not just about survival, they were about building strength, maintaining endurance, and preparing for the battles that lay ahead. In the quiet of the longhouse, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the comforting aroma of freshly cooked meals, the Vikings were able to sustain themselves for the long days ahead. Their diet, simple yet effective, was a reflection of their deep connection to nature and their understanding of what their bodies needed to survive and thrive. The food they ate powered their bodies, fueling them for the tasks that would become legendary, shaping the course of history for generations to come. Let us now gently drift into the changing rhythms of the Viking year, a life carefully shaped by the seasons. Imagine the quiet shift in the atmosphere as the days grow shorter and the crisp bite of the northern wind sweeps across the landscape. The Viking diet, like their lives, was deeply connected to the natural world around them. It was a constant cycle of adaptation, adjusting the foods they ate to the land, the weather, and the challenges that each season presented. In the spring, when the earth began to warm and the first signs of new life appeared, the Vikings would turn to the fresh greens and tender shoots that marked the beginning of the growing season. The long, cold winter had kept them inside, relying on preserved meats and stored grains. But now the land was awakening, and they could feast upon nature's new offerings. The smell of freshly gathered herbs, wild berries, and young vegetables filled the air, a welcome change after the sparse months of winter. The Vikings, both practical and in tune with the land, understood the importance of these early harvests. Fresh greens provided much-needed vitamins and minerals to ward off scurvy, a common affliction during the long months of winter when fresh produce was scarce. As we journey into the warmer months, we find the Vikings working the land with renewed vigor. The days are longer, the sun shining down on the fields as crops are sown and tended. Barley, oats, rye grains that had been carefully preserved through the winter are now planted, growing tall and strong under the nurturing rays of the sun. Grains would serve as the foundation of many Viking meals throughout the year, from thick, hearty porridges to breads that filled the longhouses with warmth and the smell of baked goods. The Vikings were no strangers to the rhythm of the land. They knew when to plant, when to harvest, and when to preserve what nature had provided. The warmer months were also a time of abundance when the Vikings turned to their livestock. Sheep, goats, and cattle provided not only meat, but also milk and wool, essential components of the Viking diet and way of life. Fresh milk and cheese became daily staples, nourishing the warriors and families who lived in the longhouses. Butter, too, was made in abundance during the summer months, stored away for use in the colder seasons. The Vikings knew that the milk from their animals, rich in fat and protein, was not only a source of comfort, but also an essential part of their diet to keep their strength up for the challenges ahead. By midsummer, when the days stretched on, for what seemed like forever, feasts would be held in celebration of the abundance of food. Picture the long table set with bread, cheese, meats, and the catch of the day from the sea. Fresh fish, salted and dried for storage, would be served alongside roasted meats, vegetables, and berries from the forest. These summer feasts were not just about the food. They were about the community. Family and friends gathered to share in the bounty of the earth, to celebrate the abundance that the land had provided. These feasts, bathed in the soft light of the summer evening, were a time for storytelling, laughter, and rest before the hard work of the autumn months. As the sun began to set earlier in the evening and the crisp autumn air returned, the Viking diet shifted once again. The last of the summer's produce would be harvested: apples, root vegetables, berries, preserved for the months to come. The harvest season was a time of hard work, with the Vikings working together to gather the fruits of their labor. The days were filled with the bustle of canning, salting, drying, and pickling. It was a time for preparation, ensuring that there would be enough food to sustain them through the long, dark winter. The autumn harvest brought with it the last fresh fruits and vegetables of the year. The Vikings would gather apples, potatoes, onions, and carrots, storing them in cool cellars to preserve them for the winter months. These vegetables would be cooked in stews, served alongside the preserved meats and salted fish that were the cornerstone of the Viking diet during the colder months. The Vikings understood that the cold winter months would require them to rely heavily on their preserved stores, and they worked diligently to ensure that nothing went to waste. And then, as winter came to settle over the land, the Vikings would retreat into their longhouses, where warmth and food became even more essential. The air was cold, the ground covered in snow, but inside the longhouse, there was heat from the fire, warmth from the woolen blankets, and the comforting knowledge that the food they had worked so hard to preserve would sustain them. The Viking diet in winter was based on the foods they had carefully stored and prepared: salted meats, dried fish, grains, and fermented vegetables. These foods were designed not only to sustain them, but also to provide the necessary nutrients during the harsh winter months. The Vikings relied on salted hams, dried fish, pickled cabbage, and fermented grains, which provided essential vitamins, minerals, and energy during a time when fresh food was scarce. The long, dark winters were harsh, but they were also a time for the Vikings to huddle together in their longhouses, sharing meals and stories. The quiet of winter was filled with the smell of roasting meats, the crackling of the fire, and the soothing rhythm of food being prepared. Meals were simple, but they were nourishing, providing the sustenance needed to face the long, cold nights. The Vikings understood the importance of food as fuel for survival during these months, and they took great care in preserving their harvests to ensure that no food went to waste. As winter stretched on, the Vikings would continue to rely on their preserved food stores. Fish, salted meats, and grains became the foundation of their meals. The fresh food of summer was a distant memory, but the resilience of the Viking people shone through. They adapted to the rhythms of the seasons, learning to make the most of what they had and turning it into sustenance for the body and the spirit. The long winters were a time of reflection, a time to rest from the toil of the warmer months, but also a time to prepare for the return of spring and the renewal that would come with it. The Viking diet, shaped by the seasons, was an embodiment of their deep connection to the land. It was a diet of resilience, built on the cycles of nature and the harsh realities of their environment. The food they ate was not just a means of survival. It was a source of strength, comfort, and community. Through the changing seasons, the Vikings learned to adapt and thrive, relying on the abundance of the earth in the warmer months and the careful preservation of their food stores during the colder months. The rhythm of the seasons was a constant companion, guiding them through the year and shaping their diet along the way. As we gently shift into the world of Viking beverages, let us wander deeper into the longhouse, where the aroma of freshly brewed ale and mead fills the air, adding warmth and comfort to the cold, dark nights. The rhythmic hum of the brewing process, as well as the clinking of mugs, brings to life the Viking community and the essential role that these beverages played in daily life, feasts, and spiritual practices. For the Vikings, mead, ale, and other fermented drinks were not merely indulgences. They were vital parts of their culture, marking significant moments and keeping the bonds of the community strong. Let us imagine a Viking kitchen in the dim glow of the fire. Here, amidst the soft rustling of woolen blankets and the low murmur of conversation, the humble yet vital process of brewing was underway. The Vikings, skilled in the art of fermentation, would brew mead and ale, their ancient recipes, passed down through generations. Mead, the drink of the gods, was one of the most cherished beverages in Viking society, deeply entwined with their mythology and rituals. It was made from fermented honey and water, sometimes mixed with fruits, herbs, or spices, creating a unique and flavorful drink that was both sweet and strong. God mead was not just for any ordinary day. It was saved for celebrations and feasts. After long voyages, victorious battles, or important ceremonies, the Vikings would gather around the fire, raising their mugs in a toast to their gods and ancestors. Mead was considered a drink of power, a link between the mortal world and the divine. The Vikings believed that drinking mead could bring them closer to the gods, especially the god of poetry and inspiration, Bragi, who was often depicted with a golden drinking horn filled with mead. This sacred connection made mead an important part of their cultural and spiritual practices, often used in rituals, offerings, and ceremonies. As the mead flowed, so did the stories. Around the hearth, the Vikings would share tales of their adventures, of gods and heroes, of battles fought and won, and of journeys across distant lands. These stories were passed down through generations, just like the brewing techniques. Mead, in its way, was a drink that nourished the soul as much as it nourished the body. It created bonds, fostered camaraderie, and provided a sense of continuity with the past. But the Vikings were not limited to mead alone. Ale, another staple of Viking life, was brewed from barley, oats, or wheat. The brewing process was simple, yet effective, with grains, water, and yeast fermenting over time to create a hearty, mildly alcoholic drink. Ale was consumed daily, particularly in the longhouse, where the sound of its pouring would mingle with the crackle of the fire and the hum of everyday life. The Vikings would drink ale at almost every meal, its comforting, malty flavor acting as a companion to their simple, hearty fare. Ale was a drink that symbolized hospitality and community. The more ale one could offer, the more respect one earned. In Viking society, guests would be welcomed with generous servings, and the sharing of a mug of ale was a sign of mutual trust and friendship. In addition to ale and mead, the Vikings also enjoyed fermented fruit drinks. They would ferment apples, berries, and other fruits to create flavorful beverages that were both refreshing and nutritious. These drinks were often consumed during the summer months when fresh fruit was plentiful, but they could also be preserved for the winter months ensuring that the Vikings would have a refreshing beverage to accompany their meals even during the coldest seasons. The Vikings were adept at preserving food, and their ability to ferment fruits and vegetables was another testament to their resourcefulness and connection to the land. Alongside these alcoholic beverages, the Vikings also brewed herbal infusions for medicinal purposes. These drinks, made from herbs like chamomile, valerian, and lavender, were used to calm the nerves, aid digestion, or promote restful sleep. These soothing brews were often consumed before bedtime, creating a sense of relaxation and tranquility as the Viking warrior or farmer settled in for the night. These herbal drinks, like the food the Vikings ate, were deeply connected to the rhythms of nature and the natural world around them. The Vikings understood the power of plants and herbs, using them not only for nourishment, but also for their healing properties. The act of brewing a soothing herbal infusion was a ritual in itself, one that invited calm and peace into the home. The role of beverages in Viking society was more than just practical. They were symbolic. The act of drinking was often a communal one, with the sharing of a drink bringing people together. Whether it was a cup of mead shared between friends at a feast or a mug of ale passed around a longhouse, drinking was an integral part of Viking social life. It was an expression of hospitality, a way to build bonds, and a way to celebrate life's milestones. In this sense, the Vikings' relationship with their drinks mirrored their connection to each other. It was through the sharing of these drinks, whether in quiet moments of reflection or during loud, boisterous feasts, that they strengthened their ties to the land, their community, and their gods. Let us now gently drift into the calming process of brewing itself. Imagine the soft clink of the brewing vessels, the faint smell of malted grains filling the air as the Vikings prepare their drinks, the soft rhythm of stirring the ingredients, the patience required for fermentation. These were the quiet moments that punctuated the Vikings' otherwise active lives. The brewing process itself was a ritual, one that required care, attention, and time. It was a slow, deliberate process that mirrored the Vikings' understanding of the cycles of nature. Just as they worked with the land to grow their crops and raise their animals, they worked with time to create the perfect brew. It was a process of transformation: grains turned into ale, honey turned into mead, and in a way, it mirrored the transformation of the Vikings themselves as they moved from one season to the next, from one task to another, each step bringing them closer to their next adventure or celebration. In this way, mead, ale, and herbal drinks were not simply beverages. They were reflections of Viking life. They were part of the Vikings' relationship with their world, nourishing, comforting, and deeply connected to the cycles of nature. Whether it was mead shared in a ceremony or ale enjoyed after a long day's work, these drinks were more than just liquids to quench thirst. They were part of the rhythm of Viking life, an essential component of their diet and culture. And so, as we sip these drinks in our quiet, cozy spaces, we can imagine the Vikings gathered around their hearths, their cups raised to the gods, to each other, and to the land that sustained them. As we journey deeper into the Viking world, we find ourselves in the wild, untouched landscapes where the Vikings foraged for foods that are little known today. Let us drift through the quiet forests, along the misty coastlines, and across the snow-covered tundra as we discover the forgotten foods that sustained these mighty warriors. The Vikings were not just farmers and hunters. They were foragers, deeply connected to the land and its seasonal gifts. Their diets were diverse, shaped by the environment around them, and many of the ingredients they used are scarcely known to us today. We begin in the deep forests and rugged hills, where the Vikings would gather a wide variety of wild herbs, berries, nuts, and roots. These plants, many of which were native to the Nordic regions, were highly prized for their nutritional and medicinal properties. They were more than just food. They were part of the Vikings' understanding of the natural world and their relationship with it. The Viking world was one of resourcefulness, where every plant, every tree, every root was carefully utilized to nourish the body, heal the mind, and even provide spiritual sustenance. Let us start with the berries. Among the many fruits that the Vikings would gather were lingonberries, cloudberries, and bilberries. These small tart berries grew abundantly in the northern landscapes, and the Vikings would gather them in the late summer and autumn months. Lingonberries were often used to make preserves, a crucial food item that could be stored for the long winter months. These preserves, sweetened with honey, would provide the Vikings with a source of sugar and nourishment during the colder months. When fresh fruits were scarce, cloudberries, golden in color and sweet in flavor, were another treasured fruit of the Viking Age. They were often eaten fresh or used in jams and sauces. Their rich, tart taste adding a delightful contrast to the savory dishes of the Viking diet. In the dense forests, the Vikings also foraged for nuts, particularly hazelnuts and walnuts. These nuts, packed with energy and healthy fats, were an essential part of Viking diet. They would be eaten as a snack, added to stews, or ground into flour for baking. Hazelnuts, in particular, were important in Viking nutrition. Rich in vitamins and antioxidants, they were a vital source of nutrition, particularly during the winter months when other fresh foods were scarce. The Vikings were skilled at using these foraged foods to create well-balanced meals that sustained them through long winters and grueling battles. Now, we come to the roots and tubers that the Vikings dug up from the earth. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and parsnips were staples in the Viking diet. These hardy vegetables were easy to grow and could withstand the harsh Scandinavian winters. They were stored in cool cellars and eaten throughout the colder months, providing essential carbohydrates and vitamins. The Vikings also foraged for wild roots like dandelion and burdock. These plants, though not as commonly consumed today, were highly regarded in Viking times for their medicinal properties. Dandelion roots were often used in teas and infusions to aid digestion, while burdock root was believed to have detoxifying qualities, helping to cleanse the body of impurities. As we wander through the Viking landscape, we come across another valuable food source, the wild herbs and medicinal plants that grew in abundance across Scandinavia. The Vikings had an intricate understanding of the plants around them, using them not only for food, but for their healing properties. Herbs like sage, thyme, and wild garlic were commonly foraged, and these aromatic plants were used in cooking and as remedies for various ailments. Sage, for instance, was prized for its digestive benefits, while thyme was used to treat colds and coughs. Wild garlic, with its pungent scent and flavor, was often added to meats and stews, giving them a distinctive taste and offering antibacterial properties to help ward off illness. Vikings also relied on a variety of fungi and mushrooms that grew in the damp forests and meadows. Some of these wild mushrooms were used in cooking, while others were valued for their medicinal properties. The Vikings used mushrooms such as chanterelles and boletus, which were rich in flavor and provided essential nutrients. These mushrooms were often added to soups and stews, enriching the dish with their earthy, umami taste. Some mushrooms, like the reishi, were also used for their medicinal properties, believed to promote longevity and boost immunity. As we drift further into the Viking world, we arrive at the ancient grains that were central to their diet. Barley, oats, and rye were the primary grains cultivated by the Vikings. These grains were used to make bread, porridge, and a variety of other dishes. Barley, in particular, was an important crop for the Vikings. It was hardy and could grow in the cold, wet conditions of Scandinavia, making it a reliable food source. Barley was ground into flour to make bread, which was a staple of the Viking diet. The Vikings would bake their bread in the longhouse, using a simple hearth to cook it. The bread was often dense and hearty, providing essential energy for the day's work. Oats, too, played a significant role in the Viking diet. Oatmeal, a warm and filling breakfast dish, was eaten by Vikings. To start the day, oats were also used to make porridge, which was often served with honey or berries. Rye was another important grain for the Vikings, and it was used to make rye bread. Rye bread was denser and darker than wheat bread, providing a rich, earthy flavor that was perfect for the Viking lifestyle. Rye was also used to make a type of flatbread, which was often eaten with cheese or meat stock in addition to these grains. The Vikings also foraged for wild grasses, such as wild barley, that could be used to make flour. These wild grasses were ground into flour and used to make simple, rustic bread that was both nutritious and filling. These wild grains, though not as cultivated as the domesticated varieties, were an important part of the Viking diet, particularly in regions where farming was more difficult. Throughout this journey, we see how the Vikings lived in harmony with the land. Their diet was diverse and resourceful, relying on what nature provided them. The foraging of wild foods, the cultivation of grains, and the careful preparation of food were all integral parts of Viking life. Every meal was a reminder of their deep connection to the earth and their ability to thrive in even the harshest conditions. Now, as we settle into the warmth of our own homes, we can reflect on the resourcefulness and wisdom of the Vikings. The foods they ate were not just sustenance. They were a reflection of their understanding of nature, their respect for the land, and their ability to adapt to the world around them. The Viking diet was not just about survival. It was about living in harmony with the cycles of nature, about utilizing every resource the land had to offer, and about creating nourishing, comforting meals that sustained them through long winters and long voyages. And in that, we find a peaceful connection to the rhythms of nature and the quiet wisdom of the past. Now, let us gently step into the heart of Viking culture, where food was not only a means of survival, but a deep and meaningful part of their spiritual and cultural lives. As we settle into this quiet space, we can imagine the warmth of a Viking. Longhouse, the flickering light of the hearth, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. The smell of roasting meats, baking bread, and brewing mead fills the air, mixing with the earthy scents of straw and wood. But food in Viking culture was more than just nourishment. It was intertwined with their rituals, their beliefs, and their connection to the gods. Food played a significant role in Viking feasts and religious practices. It was not merely consumed for sustenance, but served as an offering to the gods, a way to honor the divine forces that governed the world. In the Viking world, the gods were ever present, influencing every aspect of life, from the harvest to the success of a voyage. And food, in all its forms, was a way for the Vikings to express gratitude to these gods for their protection and blessings. Feasts were a central part of Viking life, both in everyday life and in their rituals. A Viking feast was a gathering of the community, a celebration of abundance, and a reaffirmation of their bond with each other and with the gods. The meals were often elaborate, featuring roasted meats, fish, and a variety of side dishes made from the grains, vegetables, and fruits they had gathered. Mead, the sweet, fermented drink made from honey, was served in large wooden mugs, and its consumption was seen as a way to connect with the gods, particularly the god Odin, who was associated with wisdom and poetry. These feasts were more than just meals. They were sacred ceremonies. The Vikings believed that the gods would attend their feasts in spirit, and offerings of food were made to them as a sign of respect. For example, it was common for the Vikings to sacrifice a portion of their meal, often a piece of meat or a drink offering, to the gods. These offerings were made in the belief that the gods would be pleased with the food and in return would bestow blessings on the community. The act of sharing food in this way created a sense of unity, not only among the people present, but with the divine forces that shaped their world. One of the most important foods in Viking religious practices was meat. The Vikings believed that offering meat to the gods was a way to honor their strength and vitality. Meat was considered a powerful food, and its consumption was associated with the strength and courage of warriors. During sacrifices and feasts, large animals like cows, pigs, and sheep were often slaughtered, and their meat was shared among the people. The Vikings also offered sacrifices to the gods, including Odin and Freya. By sacrificing the animals and giving portions of their meat to the gods, this act of giving was seen as a way to strengthen the bond between humans and gods, ensuring divine favor in battles, voyages, and harvests. Beyond the feasts and sacrifices, food in Viking culture also symbolized the interconnectedness of life, death, and the afterlife. The Vikings believed that food played a vital role in the journey to the afterlife. In the Viking sagas, there are numerous references to the importance of feasts and food in the afterlife. When a Viking warrior died, it was believed that they would be welcomed into the halls of Valhalla, Odin's great hall of the slain, where they would enjoy eternal feasts with the gods. In Valhalla, the warriors would feast on roasted boar and drink mead, a reward for their valor in battle. The Vikings believed that the afterlife was a place of endless celebration, where food and drink would nourish the warriors for all eternity. The role of food in Viking mythology extends beyond feasts and sacrifices. It also plays a significant role in the creation myths and stories of the gods. Take, for instance, the myth of the creation of the world, which begins with the primordial being Ymir, whose body was used to create the earth. The myth tells us that after the gods killed Ymir, they used his flesh to form the land, his bones to form the mountains, and his blood to form the oceans. In this story, food is directly linked to creation, to the very foundation of the world, showing the deep symbolic importance of nourishment in the Viking worldview. Another important figure in Viking mythology is the goddess Freya, who is often associated with fertility, love, and beauty. She is also connected to food and its role in sustaining life. Freya's symbolic association with food goes beyond her role as the goddess of love and beauty. She is also a goddess of abundance, and her blessing was sought for bountiful harvests and successful hunts. Offerings of food, particularly bread and grains, were often made to Freya in the hope that she would bless the land with fertility and ensure the community's survival through the harsh winters. As we reflect on the role of food in Viking culture and mythology, we see how deeply intertwined it was with their understanding of the divine, the cycle of life, and their connection to the natural world. Food was not simply a means of survival for the Vikings. It was a tool for communication with the gods, a way to honor the cycles of nature, and a symbol of the strength and unity that bound their society together. In every meal, every offering, and every feast, the Vikings were acknowledging their dependence on the land and the divine forces that shaped their world. This connection to food and the gods was a central part of their spiritual lives, shaping their beliefs, their rituals, and their understanding of the world around them. Let us now, as we move on in our story, turn to the role of food in the daily lives of Viking warriors. How did these powerful meals fuel the strength of the warriors who set out on daring voyages and fought fierce battles? Let us explore how the food they ate nourished both their bodies and their spirits, preparing them for the challenges they would face. You said, Team 1 Guy Thame Chat Pete said. Segment 7. The role of food in Viking culture and mythology, expanded. Food is symbolism in Viking society. As we enter the heart of Viking culture, it's important to reflect on how food was not just something that filled the stomach, but was deeply embedded in the spiritual and cultural fabric of Viking life. Imagine the scene, the crackle of a warm fire filling the long house with the comforting scent of roasted meat, the flicker of candlelight casting soft shadows on the walls, and the earthy smell of fresh bread being baked in the hearth. The smell of mead, sweet and intoxicating, lingers in the air, mixing with the aromas of freshly prepared dishes. The Vikings knew that their sustenance was far more than simple nutrition. It was a ritual, a connection to their gods, and a symbol of their unity with the earth. Food, especially during feasts and religious ceremonies, was a means of honoring the gods. The Vikings believed that the gods were present in their everyday lives, from the harvest to their home-cooked meals. They paid tribute to the divine forces by offering food at sacred feasts, marking important events in the cycle of life and death. The very act of sharing food was seen as an offering to the gods, a token of gratitude for the blessings bestowed upon them. This reverence for food was not limited to ceremonial meals, but permeated everyday life. The process of hunting, farming, and cooking was intertwined with their understanding of the divine. In the Viking worldview, food was not only a gift from the earth, but also a way to maintain balance in the universe. One of the most symbolic aspects of Viking food rituals was the offering of meat to the gods. Whether it was a portion of roasted boar or a share of freshly caught fish, the Vikings believed that meat was a powerful food, one that could honor their strength, courage, and vitality. The most sacred of these sacrifices were made during feasts, where meat was shared communally, not just among the people, but with the gods as well. These feasts were a way to ensure that the gods would look favorably upon their community and protect them from misfortune. The Vikings also believed that food had the power to connect them to the afterlife. In Viking mythology, the gods feasted in grand halls, enjoying eternal abundance. In the afterlife, warriors were believed to be welcomed into Valhalla, Odin's hall of the slain, where they would dine on endless portions of boar and drink mead in the company of the gods. These feasts were symbolic of the rewards of bravery in battle and the honor of being chosen by the gods. By sharing food in this world, the Vikings believed they were preparing themselves for their place in the afterlife, where they would continue to feast and celebrate with their divine protectors. This connection between food and the afterlife was central to the Viking concept of feasts in the spiritual realm. The Vikings believed that food was not just for the living, it was part of the great cosmic cycle that included life, death, and rebirth. The Vikings were keenly aware of the fleeting nature of life, and so they placed great importance on the nourishment that sustained them. For the Vikings, feasting was not just about indulgence. It was about affirming their place in the grand narrative of the cosmos. When they ate, they did so in remembrance of their gods and ancestors, and in the hope that their offerings would ensure favor from the divine forces that governed their world. The gods, too, were believed to partake in these earthly feasts. Odin, the chief of the gods, was often depicted as sitting at the head of the table, feasting on the meat of slain animals, sharing it with the warriors who had died bravely in battle. These feasts were not just communal gatherings, they were sacred acts of communion between the gods and the mortals they watched over. By offering food to the gods, the Vikings believed they were reaffirming their connection to the divine. The act of offering food to the gods was also a way to ensure the continued prosperity of the community, ensuring that the harvest would be bountiful, the animals would thrive, and the warriors would return home victorious from their battles. But food did not just represent sustenance, it was also a symbol of fertility, abundance, and the cyclical nature of life. Take, for instance, the goddess Freya, who was associated with love, beauty, and fertility. Freya was also a goddess of abundance, and it was believed that her blessings ensured the prosperity of the land. Offerings of food were made to her to ensure good harvests and successful hunting trips. Her connection to food was not limited to the harvest, but extended to the very act of cooking and preparing meals. By offering food to Freya, the Vikings were not only honoring her, but also ensuring that the land would continue to provide for them. Her role in fertility extended beyond the fields to the family. The Vikings believed that Freya's blessings were essential for the health and well-being of their homes and families. A meal shared with loved ones was seen as a celebration of the bonds that tied families together, and Freya was often invoked to ensure that these bonds would remain strong. The act of cooking and eating together was a way of reinforcing family ties, as well as a way of honoring the gods who watched over them. Similarly, the role of food in Viking society was also deeply connected to the cycles of nature. The changing seasons were closely tied to the foods available to the Vikings, and they learned to adapt their diet to the rhythms of the natural world. In the summer, fresh fruits and vegetables were abundant, while in the winter, preserved meats, dried fish, and salted vegetables sustained them. The act of preserving food for the winter was not only a practical necessity, but also a symbolic act of preparing for the challenges ahead. It was a way of ensuring that they could continue to survive and thrive, even during the harshest of conditions. As we reflect on the role of food in Viking culture, we see that it was much more than just a means of survival. It was a connection to the divine, a way to honor the gods and ancestors, and a symbol of the cycles of life and death. Food was the medium through which the Vikings maintained their connection to the gods, ensuring that their lives were filled with abundance, strength, and prosperity. From feasts to sacrifices, food was an essential part of the Viking worldview, a reminder of their dependence on the land and the divine forces that shaped their world. And so, as we continue to explore the fascinating history of the Vikings and their remarkable diet, we move from their food practices to the story of the Viking warrior. How did their meals fuel their strength and endurance? What role did food play in their day-to-day survival? Let us turn to that now, as we learn about the warriors' food, the meals that powered them through their daring voyages and fierce battles. Let us drift slowly into this story, where we will see how the Vikings truly sustained themselves on their journeys. As we gently turn the page of history, we enter the world where food becomes more than just a means of survival. For the Vikings, food was deeply interwoven with their culture, their values, and their spirituality. It wasn't just about filling the stomach, but about celebrating life, connecting with the divine, and honoring the cycles of nature. The Viking world was a land where rituals and offerings shaped daily life. A single meal could be infused with meaning, turning a humble feast into an act of reverence for the gods and the world around them. This connection between food and spirituality was a cornerstone of Viking society, gently guiding their actions and beliefs. Imagine the warmth of the hearth, flickering softly against the dim light of a Viking longhouse. The scent of roasting meats and baked bread fills the air, while a sense of community and reverence settles over the people gathered there. The Viking feasts were much more than simple gatherings. They were sacred ceremonies. The food wasn't merely for nourishment. It was part of a greater cosmic cycle, honoring the gods, the ancestors, and the spirits that guided them. Feasts were often held in honor of the gods, particularly after a victory or a successful harvest. It was common for the Vikings to offer portions of their meals to the gods as a gesture of gratitude and respect. Such rituals were woven into the fabric of daily life. Even the most mundane meal could take on a sacred significance. Before eating, it was customary to offer a toast to the gods, calling upon them for blessings of health, prosperity, and protection. The Viking warriors, especially, would offer a drink to Odin, the god of wisdom, war, and death, in hopes of gaining strength and favor in battle. The symbolism of food in Viking rituals extended beyond meals shared in the longhouse. At certain times of the year, particularly during the winter solstice, special feasts would be held in honor of the gods, marking the passing of the old year and the hopeful arrival of the new. During these sacred feasts, great care was taken in the preparation and presentation of the food, elevating the meal to an act of devotion. Food also played a role in Viking funerary customs. When a Viking warrior was laid to rest, a portion of his most cherished food would often be placed in the grave or cremated with him. The offerings were believed to ensure a safe journey to the afterlife, where the warrior could continue his battles in Valhalla. These offerings were a means of nourishing the soul, helping it move beyond the physical realm and into the next dot in the world of the Vikings. The gods themselves had a strong relationship with food. The mighty gods of Asgard, the home of the Norse pantheon, were not distant beings removed from earthly concerns. They were active participants in the everyday lives of the Vikings, and their needs were just as real as those of the people. Take, for example, the story of Odin the Allfather. Odin was often depicted as an old man with one eye who had sacrificed much in search of wisdom. But what most don't know is that Odin had two loyal ravens, Hugin and Munin, who would bring him information from the world. They were fed by Odin with offerings, including the meat from sacrifices. This relationship between Odin and his ravens speaks volumes about the sacredness of food in Viking culture. Even the gods had to be nourished by what the Vikings offered. The Aesir, the gods of the northern pantheon, often feasted on mead and roasted meats. It was said that in Valhalla, Odin's great hall, the warriors who had fallen in battle dined on the flesh of the Shrimner, a magical boar that was cooked every night and resurrected the next day. This endless supply of food symbolized the Viking ideals of resilience and renewal. Just as the boar's flesh was renewed, so too was the strength of the warriors, who ate it in many ways. These stories reflected the Viking belief in abundance and renewal, a cycle that paralleled the cycles of life, death, and rebirth they experienced on Earth. The food they ate, then, was a symbol of their relationship with nature, the gods, and the eternal cycle of existence. The connection between food and the afterlife was strong in Viking culture. When a Viking warrior died, the offerings of food played an essential role in ensuring that the deceased would have everything they needed for the next life. This was especially true when a warrior was buried in a ship or placed in a burial mound. The ship burial, in particular, was a sacred ritual in Viking society, symbolizing the warrior's journey into the afterlife. The food offerings made during these funerary rites were not only for the warrior's benefit, they were also an act of connection for those left behind. By offering food to the deceased, the living reaffirmed their bonds with the dead. This exchange was not just one-sided. It was believed that the gods, ancestors, and spirits would take part in the feast, partaking of the nourishment that was offered, and ensuring that the cycle of life continued in harmony. Rituals involving food were not confined to the warrior class. In fact, the Viking household would often hold quiet ceremonies where food was offered to the gods to seek their favor in matters of health, prosperity, and safe travels. These simple acts were woven into the daily fabric of Viking life, offering a sense of security and connection to the divine. The myths and legends of the Vikings also contain deep connections to food and the act of eating. For example, the ** Norse goddess Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, was often associated with the bounty of nature. Her sacred offerings were often of fruit and grain, symbolic of the fertility of the land. Frigg, the mother goddess, was also associated with the protection of the home and hearth, where food was prepared and shared. Freya's association with abundance and Frigg's connection to the hearth reinforced the Viking understanding that food was not just for survival, but for nurturing relationships, both with the earth and with the gods. Thus, we see that food for the Vikings was much more than simple sustenance. It was a vital part of their mythology and rituals, a way to commune with the divine, and a tool to connect with the afterlife. Each meal, each offering, was a gesture toward the sacred, and through these offerings, the Vikings found their place in the great cosmic cycle. As the years have passed, these rituals and traditions may seem distant, but still, The connection between food and the divine can be felt in the quiet moments of our own lives. When we gather for meals with loved ones, we honor the same cycles that the Vikings once celebrated. And while we may not offer food to gods as they did, we continue to nourish ourselves and our loved ones, maintaining the same connection to the earth and the spirit of renewal. So, as you lie down to rest tonight, think of the humble meal, the sacred offerings of the Viking age, and the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Like the Vikings, we, too, share in the nourishment that sustains us. As we gently drift through these stories, let us now turn to the heart of Viking food, the meals that nourished the warriors, supported their long voyages, and fueled their adventures. For the Vikings, food was not just something they consumed. It was a source of strength, vitality, and sustenance for their bodies, which in turn helped them conquer new lands and build their formidable legacies. The Viking warriors, known for their resilience, bravery, and endurance, required food that would support their physically demanding lifestyle. Their diet was high in protein, vital for building strength and muscle, especially for warriors who engaged in long hours of physical labor, rowing, and fighting. The richness of their meals was designed to keep them strong, enduring, and ready for battle, whether on land or at sea. The primary source of protein for the Vikings came from animals, which were central to their diet. Beef, pork, and mutton were commonly consumed, and much of the meat was preserved through drying, salting, or smoking to withstand long winters and voyages. The preservation of meat allowed the Vikings to have access to protein-rich foods during the harsh, cold months when fresh supplies were scarce. The smoked meat, such as dried venison or salted pork, was often paired with grains like barley or oats, creating a balanced and sustaining meal for the hardworking Vikings. Fish, too, played a critical role in the Viking diet, especially for those living along the coasts or near rivers. The abundance of fish provided them with essential omega-3 fatty acids, which are vital for maintaining cognitive function, stamina, and heart health qualities the Vikings valued immensely for their long expeditions. Fish, including herring, cod, and salmon, was often salted or dried, making it perfect for preservation and transport. Even in the coldest months, these nourishing fish remained a reliable and essential source of sustenance. Oats, barley, and rye grains that thrived in the Nordic climate were the cornerstone of Viking carbohydrate intake. These grains were ground into flour and used to make hearty breads, porridges, and cakes. The simplicity of these foods did not diminish their nutritional value. The Vikings' love for oatmeal, especially during their long voyages or after a long day of physical activity, is a testament to the nourishing and comforting properties of this humble grain. Oats provided the Vikings with the energy they needed to sustain their demanding physical activities. Imagine a Viking warrior preparing for battle or setting out on a long journey by sea. The air is crisp, the longhouse is filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted meat, and the flickering flames of the hearth cast warm shadows across the room. Before embarking on such an intense journey, the Viking warrior would eat meals that were rich in protein and carbohydrates, foods that would provide the energy needed to endure long hours of physical exertion. Before battle, it was said that the warriors would eat hearty meals to ensure they had the stamina to fight fiercely. Meat stews, rich with root vegetables like turnips and carrots, were common, as they provided both sustenance and warmth for the body. Porridge, made from oats and barley, was often served with butter, honey, and berries, offering a sweet, energy-filled dish to start the day. These meals were designed not only to fuel the body, but also to maintain morale. The Vikings knew the importance of feeling strong, so their meals were designed to give them a sense of power, purpose, and connection to their heritage. And yet, the Vikings did not rely on meat alone. They were keen foragers, gathering wild plants, berries, and herbs to supplement their diet. Wild herbs such as sage, thyme, and juniper were often used to flavor their food and were also considered to have medicinal qualities. These herbs were believed to help prevent illnesses and were used to boost the immune system, essential for the long travels and harsh winters they endured. Before embarking on voyages, Viking sailors would prepare dried fish, salted meats, and hearty bread for their long sea journeys. They also carried with them dried fruits, nuts, and fermented foods like sauerkraut, which provided important nutrients and could survive the lengthy trips. These foods not only nourished their bodies, but also ensured that they were ready for whatever challenges the sea might throw their way. As we move gently into the winter months of the Viking year, let us reflect on how the changing seasons impacted their diet. The Vikings lived in a world where the long, dark winters tested their ability to survive, and food preservation was an art. The ability to store food for the cold months ahead was not just a matter of practicality, but a lifeline for the Vikings. Meats and fish were carefully preserved through drying, smoking, and salting, allowing them to survive through the winter when fresh food was not available. The Vikings also preserved berries, fruits, and vegetables by drying or fermenting them. They would bury roots like carrots, turnips, and parsnips in the earth, where the cold temperatures would help preserve them for later use. This ability to preserve food was crucial to their survival, and it was a practice that connected them deeply to the land and the natural cycles of the world around them. The importance of food preservation also extended to beverages. Mead, an alcoholic drink made from fermented honey, was often brewed and stored for later use. Mead was more than just a drink for the Vikings. It was also used in rituals and offerings to the gods, symbolizing abundance, strength, and renewal. The Vikings believed that the gods themselves enjoyed mead, and that consuming it connected them to the divine forces of nature and the nos. Afterlife. As we gently move toward the end of our exploration, it's essential to consider how food impacted the Viking warrior's mindset. The Vikings were a people who understood the connection between body and mind. Their meals were designed not only nourish, but also fortify the spirit. A Viking warrior knew that a well-fed body was a strong body, capable of enduring the toughest of battles. Every meal, whether it was a humble bowl of porridge or a lavish feast, was a reminder of their strength, their culture, and their purpose. Vikings placed great value on their warriors, not only for their physical strength, but also for their resilience and courage. A warrior's diet was a reflection of his strength, and the foods that nourished him were seen as tools to help him fulfill his destiny. Meals were often shared communally, fostering a sense of unity and camaraderie that was vital to the Viking way of life. Food was an essential part of their warrior ethos, reminding them that they were part of something greater, part of a culture that valued not just survival, but strength, endurance, and glory. And so, the Viking diet was more than just the sum of its parts. It was a way of life, a reflection of their connection to nature, the gods, and the community. Each meal, each offering, and each act of nourishment was a reminder of who they were and what they stood for. As we reflect on the Viking diet, let us consider the simplicity and power of the meals that sustained them. In a world of challenges and hardships, their food was a source of comfort and strength. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest of winters or the harshest of battles, they had what they needed to endure and thrive. So, as you close your eyes and settle into rest, think of the humble yet powerful meals that sustained the Viking warriors. Let the simplicity of their food remind you of the strength within you, and the quiet endurance that lies in the most basic of things. With each meal, the Vikings found nourishment not only for their bodies, but for their spirits. And as we end this journey into the past, we can reflect on the enduring power of the Viking diet, a testament to their strength, resilience, and connection to the world around them.